Good afternoon and welcome to everyone to today's webinar. I was exploring the strategic importance of change management, and I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by Professor Eddie Obeng. Hello.
Hello.
And we'll be exploring a lot of the themes of change, including some really practical insights for things that you can do to help you manage change. I'm also delighted to share with you that 5 lucky winners that are joining today will end up being sent a copy of Eddie's book signed by him, and also we will be sending you the link after the session today should anyone want to purchase the book, where you'll be able to get hold of it at 50% discount. And it's absolutely, as you can tell from my thumb through copy here, it's an absolute wealth of knowledge in there, of insights born over more than 30 years. So lastly, just before I turn to Eddie, just remind you that we do like these sessions to be really practical and interactive. So please, if any of you want to ask questions and get the benefit of answers directly from Eddie today, please do use the Q&A function on Zoom, and I will endeavour to get those questions answered, as many as I can, over the next 40-50 minutes. So without further ado, welcome Eddie. Delighted to have you as someone who's both been a researcher, educator, author, etc., as well as a great public speaker, not to mention founder of Pentacle, your virtual business school. The accolades are almost too many to mention. But I wanted to just get started, particularly for people who may not be so familiar with you, is what drove your passion in change management and got you thinking this was a topic you really wanted to get into?
Oh gosh. My first project ever was when I was about 9 years old. I organized all the neighborhood kids to build a go-kart. And in fact, there's a picture of it on the back of the book. And so I discovered early on about things like stakeholders and requirements and stuff like that. And then, so that was really my forte into project management. And then while I was at Ashridge, I did a piece of work which suggested the world was going to be working a little bit differently. And one of the areas which was really crucial was about the pace of change versus the pace of learning. I'll tell you more about that later. But it was clear that something had happened to the amount of change happening around us in our organizations, and most people didn't know what to do about it. So I got more curious than passionate. I was curious about everything to do with that change, whether it was innovative, whether it needed leadership. So I started looking at all those different aspects, including the strategic ones as well.
Fantastic. And of course, the first edition of this book, you wrote some 30 years ago. I think it came out, I have a copy on my shelves at home in 1994. What do you think?
Me. I'm not really,
sorry
really
about that.
Old.
So what do you think, what drove you to feel it was time to do it again? Because you mentioned that concept of a lot's changing, and I think a founding principle is this kind of pace of change. Yes. Can you explain that a bit more for us?
Yeah, so the first book ended up coming out because I wrote an article for the Sunday Times about projects and how projects could change the world and project managers could contribute. Because in those days, being a project manager was not anything anyone intelligent wanted to do. If you were naughty at work, then they'd send you to special projects, and that's how it was. And I'd written this thing saying projects could really help companies with change because change is happening, etc. And it came out on the same weekend as Margaret Thatcher left office. So everyone in the world read it. And so suddenly we got lots of phone calls. Can you tell us more about this project and change stuff? So I wrote All Change, the first version, and it became a bestseller straight away because it was written as half a story. Yeah. So even if you didn't have a technical background, you could follow the story and get the learning, and then half tools. So I thought, well, that's it, done and dusted, sorted. And then the real trigger for this book was coming on 30 years later. I realized that I missed out a couple of bits. Like, for example, over the past 5-8 years, people have been talking about transformation, digital transformation, AI transformation. And the statistics are dire on success. They mostly just fail, okay? And the reason is because they're not like normal change. So I wanted to write about transformational change. So that's one bit. I wanted to add that in. Then the second one was in the interim period, I had so I have this model called the obnoxious client. And the obnoxious client is the one who comes and asks you to do something which you can't yet do, and it's really annoying. And I had this obnoxious client called Simon Cooper, who was at JP Morgan. And he came and asked me about how to make his projects even better and, if possible, perfect. And so I laughed, of course, as one does, ridiculous man. And then we spent time trying to work out why projects weren't perfect. So I wanted to write about what happens to stop projects being perfect and what you might do about it. So I wanted to make it more of an encyclopedia. So you run from, I don't know anything about projects, I'm reading the story, to I actually know about projects, but here's some new ways of thinking and tools, to I'm really good at projects, but I'm not quite yet perfect, to I'm trying to deliver transformational change, I'm very senior, and I'm trying to figure out how it all fits together. So that's what I've tried to do with the book. That was the impetus behind it, to try and write a book for the whole journey people go through with
and
change.
we'll come back to a couple of those, particularly on perfect projects and transformation. But in terms of then who it's designed for, because as you said, you've added these bits in just for people that might be listening, because I think it's a very powerful book and it can appeal to a wide range of stakeholders. That was the idea. But is that your intention with
That's
this?
exactly the intention, to try and write a book which appeals to everyone from people who are new to projects all the way through, plus also their stakeholders, because I've written with a common set of words and a language so that across the organization, you all come to realize what, I don't know, a stakeholder really is, so you can operate in concert. And I've had a couple of organizations where they've bought copies for all their managers and stuff. So that's been quite good as well.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
And I have to say, I can say from my own experience of having read the book, not only 30 years ago, so I'm in the same era, but also more recently, is one of the important things, and I really want our listeners to understand this, is it's not a book where you have to start on page 1 and go to page 400 or whatever it is. It's really intended to be an applied use tool, isn't
it? Absolutely. So the way I've tried to write it is that if you know what you're struggling with, you can quickly find your way to an explanation and then an idea, either a tool or a behavior or something which can solve your issue straight away. So it's not a book where you start on page 1 and have to go all the way through. And the reason I had to do that is because I really want people to be able to apply it.
Yeah.
I wasn't planning to write a textbook. It's very encyclopedic, but I wasn't planning to write a textbook. I'm trying to write a how-to manual.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to turn to the right page and go, right, oh, what does it say there? Let me try that and put it into practice. It's not a theoretical book.
No, and I think that's really compelling because often, certainly as a practitioner myself, when I'm out with clients, very often they're saying, okay, I get now what you're saying, but how do I do that? And I think the beauty of the book is that it has lots of what you refer to normally as performance engagement tools that, and in the current version, even with a QR code, where you can go straight to that tool and start to understand it and apply it immediately. So it's very compelling. Something else you talk about in the book right at the beginning, and you've touched on it already, is this pace of change. And you refer to the idea of after midnight, and I think it's a key concept within the book. Can you explain a bit more about that and where you were coming from and why it's important for us to know it?
Yeah, it's actually quite amusing because I was just talking earlier to Glenn about it, which is, so I tripped over something, which was that the world was accelerating its pace because I had lots of customers and clients coming, and the stories they told me didn't fit with what I was expecting to hear. So they had like very experienced project managers who couldn't deliver very simple projects, or companies who had for years had a good strategy and the strategy has fallen apart. I had one where they'd been making things ceramics, and then all of a sudden, by using microwaves for drying things instead of normal ovens, the competitors could do it for half the price. And, so I had all these very strange things. And I also had met a chap called Eddie Goldratt, who wrote a book called The Goal. And as I dug more into it, it became clear that over a period of time, the pace of change was accelerating. The complexity was accelerating, the uncertainty and variability was accelerating. So over the previous years, you had this sort of exponential climb in how complex things are, how many people and stuff like that. But when I looked around me, I discovered the reason that these surprises were coming was because we'd moved from a world where once upon a time you could learn fast and the world was changing. So people knew what they were doing. You didn't have to worry too much about your stakeholders because they'd seen the problem before. Yeah. And it had gone to a point where the pace of change was up here, but their ability to learn and function was down here. So there's a big gap. And that was where all these surprises were coming from. And I nicknamed the crossover point midnight, because I said it's happened. Nobody noticed. Why was that? They must have been asleep. It must have been midnight. So that's a really central idea behind all the change stuff, because when you can learn fast and the world is changing, change is just something you pick up. It's not a big deal. The people element is important, but it's not the most crucial element, because getting the stuff done is. When the world's changing faster than you can learn, aha, now everything's a surprise. People don't like surprises. We can talk about that more. People have to learn because there's a gap. And anyway, even the technology you're building, you haven't fully understood because there's so many options. So that's what I call the before and after midnight, the old world and the new world. And so I started looking at what happens in the new world and trying to build real solutions for that world.
Which makes perfect sense. And I guess that means as well, from if what our ability to learn is no longer keeping pace with the pace of change, it's going to change the emphasis we need to put on some of the soft skills, and also potentially the definition of what success looks like. Can you, share some of your thoughts around that, about how we deal with success?
Absolutely. So absolutely on the soft skills, because of the change. I'll come back to that, because the design of human beings basically means that they don't love change. Whatever you say, they hate change. It's designed into the back of your neck in your brain. So but in terms of success, it makes things a bit interesting, because if you're in the old world and you've done the projects before, chances are you know what you're trying to do and how you're going to do it. So when an organization kicks a project off in the old world, they can basically write out what they're trying to do, put all the outcomes, what they want delivered, etc. And that's fine. And so they can check afterwards to see whether or not you've done what they did, what they asked for. But in the new world, you have three other situations. Sometimes the organization knows what it wants to do, but isn't clear how it's going to get there. Sometimes it knows how it's going to get there. We're going to use AI. They haven't got a clue what it's going to do. And sometimes they don't know either, except they have a problem they have to get past. So in that world, you can't write down all the things you want in advance. So it's smarter to listen to the stakeholders, and I might need to explain what a stakeholder is, and then make sure that whatever you deliver matches what the stakeholders wanted and needed, as opposed to trying to guess in advance. So again, old world. If you got a plan, no. Get a plan. It must be work brand, PERT, CPI, breakdown structure. New world. Have you got a plan? No. You must get a plan. Yeah, but I don't know what I'm doing. You must get a plan. In other words, it doesn't work that way anymore. You've got to have a different approach in the new world. And the stakeholders are basically your touchstone, because they are the reasons that you're doing the change. So when I say stakeholder, I'm thinking about three different groups of people who you might engage with. The first I call Dracula stakeholders. You know the story of Dracula. Basically, Dracula's job is he goes into villages late at night, no one sees him. Then when people are walking past, he leaps out of trees and bites them in the neck. And finally they get fed up and they all sharpen up these bits of wood called stakes, and they go up and they stab him. They're stakeholders. So your project and you are like Dracula to people, because you're driving change, it's changing their world. You probably haven't involved them, you haven't engaged them. So stakeholders are people who might want to drive a stake through your heart. So if you deliver the project successfully, they don't stab you. They're happy with the outcome. Second reason somebody might be a stakeholder is, let's say you've got a fence post, it's also a stake, and you're trying to drive it in and you need somebody to hold it for you. Challenge is, you've got the mallets to hit and they're holding the stake, the stakeholder obviously. What's the relationship? Well, they've got to trust you, otherwise they won't hold it. If you hit them once, they'll tell everyone, no one else will hold. So that's more like your team and the people who are going on that journey with you, but also maybe some of the people who are expecting the outcome. And then the third one is, imagine boxing in the ring. They're betting on you. Will you win? Will you fail? They have a financial stake or a reputational stake. They're betting on you winning on. And that might be like your senior executives or your client or someone else like that. And those are your stakeholders. And it turns out that in the old world, they were interesting, but not crucial to success because you had your tick list. In the new world, you start with the stakeholders, you work with them, you craft the solution, you get to the end, they go, well done, done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing, because it's really important, this point around the stakeholders. We've always known that we've been talking about stakeholders for a few years, but it's this idea that we often tend to go at things solution focused. And this is going to drive us towards absolutely making sure we're stakeholder, customer focused, is at the heart, and willing to adapt as a central theme, because it means success is no longer based on doing what we said we'd do right at the beginning. It's on listening and ensuring that we do what we said, do what was right as we went through the journey. Is that a fair
It's a fair
comment?
thing. I mean, there's lots of talk about project failure, and there's no such thing as a failure and stuff. I think some projects really do fail. But sometimes the stakeholders know what they want or how they want to, like your team will know how they want to be treated at the start of the project. So sometimes the stakeholders know what they want and how things should go, and that stays roughly the same all the way through. So if you deliver what they want, ka-ching. Sometimes the stakeholders learn as they go and they change what they want. So if you deliver what they've learned they now want, ka-ching. So that's the safest way of trying to provide something with value through a project, rather than trying to go, well, have we hit the right goals and so on. And sometimes people get caught up with the iron triangle, Martin Barnes's time, cost, quality. But it's still a really useful thing, because you can get a group of stakeholders around the table and you go, well, what's most important? And I tend in this fast changing world not to talk about time, cost and quality, but fast, good or cheap. So you say, what's important, being fast, being good or being cheap? And they say, oh, we're doing the Olympics. Fast is important. Don't be late, because we don't want people running when there's no track. Okay, so then you know what the balance is, and other stakeholders you can discuss and negotiate with, so together you have a view of what success looks like.
Absolutely. And I think this point about, and it's changing the way we talk with people. Now, one of the questions that came in before today's session was, well, how do I do that? How do I get someone engaged? What if someone's not engaging with me and not coming to the table? Is there a tool or somewhere you could point them that might help them explore that issue and actually get more close to their stakeholder and get them engaged?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example which is useful. So if I'm talking to someone on the phone, I don't know whether I did this with you or not, but they chat, they tell you what they're doing, they're just having conversation. I will always slip in there somewhere. If you've done this before, is there anything you want to avoid? Has this gone badly before? And is there anything you specifically want? And what I'm asking them is, I'm asking for their hopes and their fears. Because what you can then use that for is to understand them better. So that's really crucial, because now you have a better sense and they've told you what's good and what's bad. But also, that relationship building is so crucial. People often are too nervous or too shy to go and build that relationship. But also when you're talking to people, people are so used to everyone pretending that they're paying attention when they're not. So another thing which is really useful is start the conversation, I'm so and so, whatever they say, try if you can to play back to them. Okay, the pet's called playback, and basically you'd say something like, let me just be sure I've understood what you said, and then you try and explain it back to them whilst listening and paying attention. If they say yes, that's good, because now they understand that you understand, and you understand that what they asked you to, so everyone's happy. If they say no, that's even better, because now you have a start of a conversation. Oh, why didn't I understand that? I was thinking this, and then you can build the relationship and the conversation. If you don't build that conversation, that relationship, you'll go to the bottom of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the keys about this, what we were talking about, is that some of these things aren't rocket science, but actually we often lack discipline in doing it. And actually we assume that we've put our stakeholder front and centre, whereas some of these tools, like the playback tool, I know when you write about it in your book, you comment on the importance of use your own words. Don't just mirror back the words that the stakeholder said, because actually the demonstration of listening is being able to show you've understood. And if all you do is parrot it back, you haven't necessarily, and you've missed an opportunity.
That's right.
There. And these are examples of where you can literally go to the book and say, I've got that issue, playback, I'm going to go find it, and now I can use it directly, which I think is really important. And in fact, another principle, which reminds me, while we're talking about stakeholders at this point, you talk about the definition of collaboration. And you've already said we talk about stakeholders, and you use this term, it's thinking together. Too often we think of it as teamwork. Can you share a bit more around that and that importance of thinking together with stakeholders?
So what happens with a lot of things, the words, the meanings drift. So people would use the word collaboration, or they'll use the word synonymously with teamwork or cooperation, and they think they're all the same. So cooperation is, I'm not fighting you. Teamwork is, we're probably aligned in terms of common goal, and we know we're interdependent. But those aren't collaboration. Collaboration comes from the scientific world, where we would build a hypothesis and build a thesis and antithesis together. We do it together through thinking together. And that's what's really important. Now, if you take the example I had of the triangle and presenting that as fast, good, cheap, and asking your stakeholders to put a little cross where they think the right answer is, and you put a little cross, and then you start to discuss why your crosses are different, and you start thinking about, well, where's the best place for this cross for this project? Now you're thinking together, you're aligned. Yeah. And that's what collaboration is about. It's about getting to the point where you've got enough of a similar language and a similar view of how to do something that you can actually build on each other's ideas and test each other's ideas and challenge them. And often people don't do that. They'll go to the meeting and they make presentations. Presentation, red, amber, green. Presentation, red. No, it's meaningless because everyone leaves and there's no alignment in thinking.
And I guess what that implies, because you're absolutely right, very often when we come together to deliver something, particularly if there's a client team and a team from maybe a partner or vendor organisation, we start with the vision, the intent. We actually don't discuss it. And so the danger is we're already running off toward a vision where we haven't actually connected over whether it's the right one and the right things to do. Is that a fair comment?
That is a fair comment. That's why I would use something like hopes and fears at the beginning to say, well, what do you guys want out of this meeting, and what you're scared will cover? Because somebody will say, you're going to force our vision on you, and then you have a chance to build ground rules and a way to resolve that. So that's quite common. The other thing is, again, when people don't understand human beings and soft skills, when they have things like meetings, they think the meeting starts when the meeting starts. I know lots of presenters who think the presentation starts when no, the presentation starts, the meeting starts whenever it starts. So the conversation in the corridor beforehand, don't just say hello, hi, how are you, and then walk into the room. Start the conversation about, I'm worried about this, these are my fears. Start that conversation, because by the time you get into the room, it's already warmed up. Yeah. So instead of being formal and you're on this side as the client and we're on this side, you've actually already broken a lot of the ice. But people just don't understand that they're just dealing with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Other human beings that we need to connect with.
Yeah, they get into all this.
Ooh. We've had a question in, actually, I'd just like to put to you. The question is, how do you get your organisation executive to engage with the need for a change when the change doesn't align with the direction they have already set and are following?
Oh, gosh, that's a good one. No more questions from you. Okay, that's a big one. So, there are a number of different layers here. One is if they've already set the goal, they're probably invested in it, they believe in it, they're probably not thinking of anything else. A lot of people worry about things like, how they're perceived, and they have egos and stuff like that. So you've got lots of delicate things there, because it's very likely they'll reject what's being proposed. So to get somebody to start to think differently, you use the design of a human being to help you. Human beings, very simple design, all the same, okay? Basically, when there's something new like a change, I'll tell a story because it's funnier. So I used to tell a story about Eddie's ancestor, the hunter-gatherer, who goes out hunting and gathering. And they're out there hunting and gathering, and of course it's dangerous because human beings are rubbish animals. They can't run faster than a rabbit, they can't bite as well as a dog, they're going to get eaten. But here we are as the top animal on the planet. Now, if you go to the normal sort of books which tell your Discovery Channel, they'll tell you, we used our big brains, we worked in communication. No, we have opposable thumbs. None of that's true. Basically, opposable thumbs won't stop you being eaten, and using your brain while you're being eaten is also useless. What saved us was we have in our necks a piece of software about here, and what it does is it checks around you, just making sure everything's the same. Then you relax. Everything's the same, relax. That's all it does. It's called the amygdala. If you see something different, it literally turns the blood flow off to the front of your brain, switches your brain off. Then it fills you full of emotion. Okay, I'm going to get eaten. Okay, why? To keep you focused on the problem in the moment. You can't be creative when you're scared. And then it fills you full of adrenaline. Okay, and then you run away. So why am I telling you this? Because when you surprise somebody with change, it doesn't matter who they are, they go through that. It would have happened to you. You're in a meeting, somebody announces something you weren't expecting, your stomach tightens, your brain, sweat on your forehead, you can't think of what to say because your brain's off. When you get back home, you go, what I should have said in that meeting was. because your brain comes back on. Okay, so that's one half of our design. The other half of the design is, have you noticed how brilliant all your own ideas are? Yeah, they're brilliant to you, of course they are. And that's another part, because slightly higher up in your brain, there's another policeman which checks what your brain's up to, because the brain burns energy faster than muscle. So every idea you have, it says, hey brain, you're thinking, what are you going to do? Turn into more food. So you always fall in love with your own ideas, which is why you think they're brilliant, and then you try and act on them, turn into more food.
And I think in the book you refer to this as cognitive dissonance.
Absolutely.
And looking for confirmation bias, which is...
Your brain is going to take you over. Okay, so what happens therefore is that if your brain starts to work, you're going to fall in love with it. So if you go to your executive and you say to them, this doesn't make sense, blah, 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 and you scare them, they'll go down the old amygdala route, crocodile brain will kick in, and you'll get kicking.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you go down another route, which is to get them to start to think and answer questions, as their brain starts to form the questions, they'll start to fall in love with the latest idea they've had, and it almost overruns the ones they've had before. So one of the tools I use is called Issue Data Question Build, IDQB. That's the one I would recommend here. Time for a story? Yes, quick story. So the most famous use of that particular tool was, I worked with the nuclear industry when they were being privatized, and the chief executive was a chap called Bob Hawley, and we were looking at how we were going to change the nature of the nuclear industry, and it was going to be massive because they had tons of researchers and research programs, and basically the nuclear industry was there to make stuff for weapons to blow things up, not to make electricity. Everything had to change. So it was going to be massive redundancies. How do you do this? Well, we set up a communication process so nobody would be surprised, so you could get a message from the top to the bottom of the organization in a day. And then we invited them to the first meeting, and guess what we told them? We told them only things they already knew. You're going to be privatized. Have you heard about that? And they all left the meeting going, we knew all that, but we'd raised the issue. Mm-hmm. And we'd done it without surprising them, so their brains are still on. Okay? Second meeting, we brought them in, and we just gave them facts. We've got 6,000 research programs, 12 power stations. We only produce 20% of the time. We just gave them data. Now you might ask, why are you bothering to give them data? As they, oh, that was interesting, but I don't know why we need to know that. Because by the time you ask the question, if they don't have the data, they'll come up with the wrong answers because they just don't know. And then you have to fight them because they got the wrong answers. But we give them all the data of the situation. Then the third session, we started asking questions. What should we do as an executive? What's the future of research? How should we work this? How are we going to make... And people were starting to think using the data they had, brain still on, starting to, and so we got halfway down the organization. The union rep knocked on the CEO's door and said, I've been sitting through this. There's some big changes coming. You must look after my members. And Bob Hawley was perfect. He said, well, what should we do? He used a question. So he said, well, we've got to make sure they're skilled for future jobs. He listed all the things he wanted. And so he said, great. So they made a deal. And the deal was, the faster you worked your way out of a job, the bigger the bag of money you got. And you got trained to do it. And if you train somebody else to stay, you got a multiplier. So so that whole process meant people were working overtime to make themselves redundant faster.
Yeah,
Turkey's voting for an early Christmas.
Absolutely.
IDQB, issue data question, build solution together.
Brilliant. So that's a tool there directly for that person to use.
Yep.
And importantly, it's a reminder about that need to engage, truly engage,
Yes.
not follow a tick box, but actually asking questions so that people can own their own destiny.
Correct.
Really. Almost they think they got,
and
they
don't be
created
sneaky.
the idea.
Don't be sneaky asking questions trying to get your own way.
No.
Because also often, when you ask the question, they'll come up with the solution which is the best of the one you had. So be humble and accept that other people come up with good stuff.
Absolutely, and that gets back to, doesn't it, that collaboration comment that we've got to be thinking together.
Yeah.
It isn't about pushing a solution out.
No.
It's about developing one together.
Yeah.
And I want to take you back to a key principle in the book, and I think it is important, you've touched on it already, is about being able to understand the different types of change. And one of the reasons I think it's important to go back to it is also because it helps to create a language and to visualize change, which is really useful, a tool, I believe, with stakeholders. And you talk about 4 different types of change, your foggy projects, your painting by numbers, movies and quests. Can you share a bit more about that kind of the open and the closed project and why it's helpful to understand those different types of changes?
Absolutely. So if you go back to the idea of the world accelerating and the pace of change being, learning being quite flat, in the old world where you could learn fast and the world was changing, most projects were likely to be quite closed because you knew what and how. Okay, that's what I would describe as paint by numbers. You've got the little book with the numbers. Blue is 3, red is 2, put the colors in, comes out great, okay? As you approach that midnight point, suddenly you discover that you might know the goal but not the method, or the method but not the goal. So that's when it becomes more open. You get semi-open, semi-closed. And that's what I would call a quest. Quests are named after King Arthur, the quest for the Holy Grail. We know it's the Holy Grail. Great, let's find it. Well, where is it? I don't know. Where are we going to look? I don't know. Who's looking? So the methodology, the approach is just unknown. So the goal's known, method isn't. And then the other type of project, which is also in that zone there, is you'd have had this. You'd have filmed something on your phone, you upload it to YouTube, no hits, okay, because it was rubbish. There were no cats. It was a rubbish script, okay? So I call that movie. In other words, it's like a solution looking for a problem. You know how you're going to do it, but you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You haven't really worked that one out. So those are the ones in the middle. But when you hit the really big gap between what's happening in the world and ability to learn, another type comes out, which is what I call foggy projects, where basically you're not sure what or how, or maybe even why, but you know something must be done. And it's just like being lost in the fog. You literally have to take one step at a time, review. You have to be intensely disciplined because you have very few things to grasp onto. Whereas in the paint by numbers, you could have your review meetings every 2 weeks. On the fog, you're probably doing them on cube every day as a drum beat because you're learning as you go, etc.
Absolutely. Sorry. I think what I was going to say there, I think what that illustrates, if these are the different types of change, one of the messages I took from the book, therefore, is we shouldn't get hung up upon methods. No. Methods are there to help, support. But actually this is about creating a language of recognise the type of change you've got, and then that will inform both the approach you take, the stakeholders you need to look for, and even the emotional triggers, etc.
So once you understand that these 4 types of change are the preeminent ones, you stop going, this is a construction project, this is an IT project. Because you can have construction projects which are paint by numbers, you can have construction projects which are quests. Tallest building in the world, or whatever. You can have HR projects which are paint by numbers or fog. We've got to change the culture. I don't know what culture is. Okay, so you start thinking in those terms, and then that allows you to understand how you should be as a leader, for example. There's no point, if it's really foggy, being a leader who's trying to drive a particular way of doing things and telling everyone, being direct. No, that's not how you lead in the fog. You lead in the fog by listening and building trust. Completely wrong. It drives who you want in your team. Because if you are on a quest, you want people who can resolve things but are really determined. Okay, there's no point in having somebody who knows the answers on a quest because they're going to look in the wrong place. So it influences what behaviors and who you want in your team if you can't get the right people. Excuse me, and influences everything right the way down to how do you review, which is what I just commented on, and even how do you find your stakeholders, because in the paint by numbers you probably know all the stakeholders before you start, whereas in the fog every single meeting you go, is there someone new we should be talking to?
Absolutely.
So it basically paints how everything should fit together. It's really critical to understand the type of change if you really want to get success in projects.
And absolutely cool that you have that discussion with your stakeholders as well, once you've identified them for that type of change.
Correct.
Because that's going to be part of the engaging process. We've got a question that's just come in. It says, how do you balance the speed of change with the need for careful planning and consideration in an environment where things are constantly shifting? There's a second question too, but let's take that one first.
So I presume he's talking about the speed of your change to match the world, as opposed to the speed of the external. Best example I have to try and explain is the way you design your project. So traditionally, in the old world, I'll use a service station on a motorway. You start to build a service station, you'd put in the foundations, you'd get in the pumps, you do everything else, you put the hotel, you have a grand opening. That's how we used to design projects in the old world. You can still do that, okay? But if the pace of change is higher, you don't know what's going to happen to interest rates and number of people on the motorway. So you don't design your project in one piece. You break into what I call chunks, effort and benefit. And you'll see that as you drive down the motorway. They build the petrol station. Right, effort, get some money in. Then they build the shop. Then they build the kiddie play area. Then they chunk it up. So that at each stage you're getting 100% success, even though the world is still changing. It allows you to be flexible and to adapt. So it's not a challenge. You don't have to have everything in your mind before you kick off. It's how you approach it in a really effective way of being able to be slightly ahead and adapting as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that idea in answer to that question. It's about keeping things simple and doing it in bite-sized chunks, because I think the point that you and I talked about earlier today is that it actually allows us sometimes to realise some of the bits we may not need to do.
I mean, whenever I've done that with clients, the best example was I did the reinvention of Abbey National, and they were spending oodles of money, and we chunked it up, and they were going to spend oodles, and we got about halfway through, and we'd done some of the chunks, they all succeeded, and there was like a third of the money left to spend, but they didn't think it was now worth spending because we'd had all the juicy bits. So they just saved themselves the money.
Yeah.
So it's even better than that. So you didn't deliver what you set off to do, and you had a more successful project than you planned to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the dichotomy, the nice dichotomy. So the second part of the question here is, then how do you measure the success of a change initiative in a world where traditional KPIs and metrics may not always apply due to constant flux?
It depends on who's doing the measuring. Okay.
Good point, yeah.
If you are somebody who's sophisticated and doing the measuring, you do it from the stakeholders. If you are a third party who's outside trying to work out, then you can measure it however you want, you'll get it wrong. You have to drive it from the stakeholders. That's the only thing you can ever do.
And so does that mean having that discussion early, like
all
having
the time.
a discussion about how we're measuring?
It depends on the project type.
Yeah.
So if it's paint by numbers and it hasn't changed and the world hasn't moved, fine. But if it's any of the other three, you have to have that. But people will tell you, once you've built a good communication process which matches the type of project you're running, they'll tell you whether you're going in the right direction or not. Generally, projects might be a bit foggy and unclear, but the review points are too far apart. So you go a long way off track before you realize. I always say there's three ways in which you can deliver a project. If this is the starting point here, and that's where you're trying to get to, you could go directly there. Never happens. What happens is you start off from here, you wander off track, and then over here somewhere somebody shouts, you go, oh my goodness, we're off track. And then you try and get back to the track, wander off the other way. Oh my goodness. So you have this long journey, okay? And so that's the other one people do. That's horrible because basically you're happy all the time until they shout at you. So you think the project's going well, but it's a real disaster. Yeah. Funny. Okay, the other way of doing it is if you know it's a fog, you put your discipline in, you put your drum beats in.
Yeah.
And so every drum beat you discover you're off track. But it means that you're quite much closer, you're more aligned. So the question is a good one, but it's not acknowledging the fact that you have to understand the stakeholders, the type of change, and you can always adapt. I know when you're in the public sector, it's like you've signed your life away, etc. But that's a different argument altogether, because that's more about the design of the public sector and the effectiveness of using money in the public sector. But we'll park that for another day.
I think so. And I think we could go off down a rabbit warren with that one. But I think the point that you're making, and it's maybe an uncomfortable truth when we're talking about measurement of change, is that we can't just set down an absolute baseline and measure success in a linear fashion. This concept of review and actually constant review and listening is going to change the way we measure success, and that's perhaps something that people have to get used to.
And don't forget, the stakeholders have different metrics of success. So there are outcome stakeholders. They're worried about the outcome. Then there are process stakeholders, like your team. They just care whether they're learning and having a good time. They don't care about the outcome as much as the outcome stakeholders. Then there might be context stakeholders, because you're doing it in order for the UK to blossom. So they have a different view, which is, has what you've done, is it replicable? So you have to be a bit sophisticated these days and pay some attention and use your brains a bit.
And it gets back to, again, we've got to sit down and have the conversations with the relevant groups so that we define something that's appropriate for the particular problem that we're trying to solve.
Absolutely. But sometimes people just don't know how to communicate project status and things very quickly. So they have long meetings and nobody can pay attention because the meeting lasted 2 hours, you've forgotten what. So one of the pets in there is here to there, which is what I was explaining. You start here, you're aiming for there, okay, and I was talking about going off track. But here to there, basically, you get people to draw, never write, how they see the world as it is, the here, how they see the world when it's got to what they think is the right thing as an image, I don't know, and then what's going well, what's not going well. So here might be, they draw a shark-infested waters. There is lots of smiley faces and lots of integrated software. Going well, lots of big bag of money, we've got the money. Not going well, people no understanding of what code to write. So if you draw it, when they have to explain it, it'll take them 30 seconds, a minute. And so if everyone has explained what they think where the status of the project is, within 10 minutes, you've got 10 stakeholders to describe what they think it is. And now you're all aligned. If you send one of these large presentations with your PowerPoints going, and this is the spending and value add, so you have to learn how to talk and communicate effectively so you can go faster so that you can do your reviews. If you do them the old world way, you'll never get there because it's so inefficient.
And I think that's a real central theme, isn't it, with the book, as well as this idea of visualizing things together and getting people active in the process. As we go through. The book lives, I don't know that you know, but the book lives on Cube. That's where all the pets are. And the whole idea of Cube is to bring people together, to visualize together, to think together, because they're embodied as avatars, and all they do is talk about the work, and everyone has a great laugh. So it's that process which I'm trying to build in that culture, which allows people to do stuff which otherwise you can't get done. And I've built that into the book. But the book is a story of what real life is. Absolutely, and building, because it's kind of related when you talk about reviews and having these conversations. A concept that's in the book that I really like was this idea of prelimination, and particularly because I think you pose at some point in the book. Most project teams, when they sit down, if you ask them what could go wrong, they have a really good understanding, and yet projects still go wrong. So can you share with us your thoughts around that, about this prelimination and holding teams to account in a way that's fair, but helps deliver results?
So this goes back to the conversation with Simon Cooper and the perfect projects, and starting to understand. So when I started interviewing people about why your project's not all perfect, one of the things which came up was exactly that. I said, so did you know it was going to go wrong? Oh yeah, we all knew. And you waited 6 months for it to go wrong. And they'd all laugh. And most experienced project managers, at the start, they can tell you what's going to go wrong. The stakeholders might not know because they might not be able to see, but most people know what's coming. Yeah. So the question is, why don't they fix it in advance? And there are all sorts of reasons, like if I want to get a promotion, it's better if it goes a little bit wrong, then I can fix it and be a hero. I mean, there are all sorts of things like that. And then there's also an inability to talk about what could be wrong. So sometimes the culture just won't let you raise your hands and say it's going to be bad. But there's all sorts of things like that. But central to the whole idea of trying to be more successful is this pre-elimination. You have to get them eliminated before it happens. And that's then central to the idea of maybe you can produce perfect projects. Because what you could do is, and I suggest this at the beginning, you have what's called a glide path meeting. Mm-hmm. What's a glide path? A glide path is a plane or where you've turned the engines off and it's going to glide down. Okay. So in other words, what's this project going to do left to its own devices? Yeah. And you all sit down together and you go through the project and go, right, definition stage, what's going to go wrong? What's going to go wrong once we start planning? You can map it all out. And if you understand project types, that helps you a little bit more, because you can go, well, it's very foggy, so probably, or it's real paint by numbers, so everyone will come and interfere, etc. Okay, so you discuss that, and that means that's the glide path. So if any of the things you've discussed go wrong, the project leader is in trouble, because you knew they were going to go wrong. Yeah. But if they see something which is not on the list and it goes wrong and they fix it, great. If they fix it before it goes wrong, even better. So now all of a sudden we have a sensible metric for project management performance. Before we didn't have one. We played with this idea of success and tick boxes. It was always gibberish. But if you know where it's going to go, then you can understand how the project manager actually steers it through their leadership, building their team, making sure they're doing their reviews and so on, because you know what the base is. And you can say, well done, above that base, rather than confusing the two together.
And I think, I'd really encourage people to take a look at the glide path that you mentioned in the book, because it's a way of not only providing accountability, which you can measure in the team, but actually empowering, because then there's a sense of we've all sat down together and we've agreed that we know what we need to be managing. It's not like throwing people to the wolves and then holding them to account. It's actually agreeing what we think we all need to do.
That's right.
And then holding them to account, which is a different thing.
The reality of human beings is most of them, not all of them, it's about 8% psychopaths, but most of them, once they understand what they're doing, they love what they're doing, they get on well with people more or less, you almost don't have to hold them to account. In fact, they'll surprise you. Mm-hmm. But if you've got the wrong culture and you have made it hard for people, then they play the games. Then you have to chase after them. And then you're in trouble. It's called dead body syndrome. I named this after a client who was mining for gold. They sunk the deepest shaft in the world and found gold, which is what's known as amazing. Okay, on time, record time, amazing. So I said, why aren't you telling people about it? They said, we're very ashamed. I said, why? Because we had some accidents along the way and lost some people. I said, what? Oh yes, we lost them. So this is the way you think about trying to chase people, because lots of senior people don't understand this. You can focus on the goal, the outcome, the task. So you get the task all shiny and wonderful. But unfortunately, trail of dead bodies, okay? So that's not what you want. Or, and this is the other end of the spectrum where they go, it's all about people engagement. You can focus on the people. Everyone's happy, smiling, eating biscuits, total people focus. Meanwhile, the task is a steaming pile in the corner. You can end up with a steaming pile and the dead bodies, don't go there. But where you want to go to is the task complete and the people happy. You can't get to the task complete and the happy people if you've already killed them off. So to succeed, you have to engage the people to deliver the task. If you chase the task directly, you will never engage the people. So when you say holding people to account, if you engage them, they will hold themselves to account. They'll hold each other to account, because after all, it's a team, they're interdependent. But if you're chasing the task, then you feel you have to hold them to account, see what they're up to, and they never buy into it, and you end up with your dead bodies, and you can never get to the top spot.
I mean, I love that. So to me, prelimination as a concept is very powerful, because, as you said, it's not a negative thing. It's about allowing the people that know best to work together to understand what they need to do.
Yeah.
And again, great guidance within the book to help people in that. We're chomping through time, but I'm interested. Obviously, we've talked about the 4 different types of change, and it would be remiss of me as well not to mention the cheat sheets in the book. Just give a couple of minutes before, then I wanted to move to transformation and just have a few minutes on that.
Sure.
But what are the cheat sheets in the book, and how can they help people with these 4 types of change that we've been talking
Absolutely.
about?
So I mean, as I've explained, you dip into the book for what you need, but there are 4 cheat sheets, which basically I've taken, say, foggy projects. I've said, how do you know if it's foggy? How are you feeling? I'm feeling uncertain. Okay, great, it's probably foggy. And then it tells you the elements you need to concentrate on. What do you do about stakeholders? What do you do about your team? If you haven't got those behaviors, how do you compensate for them? What do you do about learning and review? What do you do about making sure that as a leader, you're able to actually do what you want? So I've basically taken fog and I've explained all the key elements of, how you lead, how you get your team to work, learning and review, risk, pre-elimination, etc. Then I've done the same thing for quests and movies. So just by picking that up, if you know what type of project you are, you've got 1 page which is going to give you some hints on something which will make your project better. And given the fact that most projects statistically, anything is good.
Absolutely, and again, I think they're a great place. If people are in pain right now on your projects, I'd really encourage them to say, take a look at those, identify using your definitions the type of project, have a discussion with the team, and have a look at these guidance. Say, are you doing it? Aren't you doing it? It's a really wonderful way of working you through. So I'm conscious we talked about, obviously they're the cheat sheets for the 4 types of change that can really help you define the approach that you take and tap into the very many tools that are in the book. But and we've talked a little bit about perfect projects, but the one that we haven't talked about yet really is transformation, which is a different beast and has often been, that term is often used synonymously for many things. Can you share a bit of your insight about how you should identify if it's a transformation and what you can do about it to help manage?
Absolutely. I mean, the delivering change, as in people and projects and stuff, a project being a chunk of change, is hard enough. I mean, there's the stats, depending on who you agree with, most of the time what people were hoping for, the stakeholders are disappointed. It's like 80%. And I did this experiment where I asked Grok, I said, Grok, if everyone used Eddie Obeng's methods, how much would the failure rate come down? Okay, and Grok said 58%. Okay, so it's not 100%. So buying the book isn't going to solve all your problems. It's going to 58. And I suspect the remaining ones, all the transformation ones. I just that's my excuse. So what happens with change is it's transformation is a little bit different from the normal projects. The analogy I like using is if you have a caterpillar and you feed it, it gets fatter. That's change, okay? But you don't make a butterfly by getting a caterpillar and sticking wings on it. Okay, because caterpillars have certain competencies. They know how to walk and eat leaves. Butterflies know how to fly and look pretty, and proboscis for drinking nice nectar things. So what happens between? Some sort of transformation happens in a cocoon, and the caterpillar learns about flying and it dissolves its legs. So transformation is a completely different beast from normal change. Generally, it comes out the foggy end. It's unlikely. If somebody said we're doing a transformation and they can tell you what the end result of the transformation is, it's not a transformation.
No,
okay,
absolutely.
So watch out for that. But I've tried in the book to try and explain that you have to do all three things. You've got to keep the caterpillar alive, you've got to build the cocoon and all the scaffolding and tools, and then you've got to discover what the butterfly really is about. And that's what transformation is about, and the success rates on that are pretty woeful.
Yeah.
But
And
now I've got the book.
I think that's absolutely, and 58%. I think most people
That's
would be
quite
happy
funny,
with that.
actually. I posted that on LinkedIn, and one of the funniest comments was, so they could improve things and they wouldn't even need AI. Sorry.
So I think the really important thing, and it's something I took away from transformation, is not evolution.
No.
It's about destroying the basis on which you're currently built, and
Exactly.
that requires a fundamentally different approach with your
Yes.
stakeholders. So it might be, even with some of the questions that we got before, if you've got a disengaged stakeholder, it may be at an issue. If you're destroying the foundations that they hold dear,
Yeah.
then that is going to take a wholly different approach. That whole idea of a metamorphosis,
Yes.
an actual scaffolding, and
Yes.
again, it helps us. You've already mentioned today that building in chunks.
Yes.
Kind of brings us back to that,
Yes.
isn't it? About
Yeah.
building that down,
Yeah.
and there's some great tools.
Yeah,
in
I
there
mean,
for that.
for me, I think project leadership, project management, program management, change management, they're all battles you fight with your brain. If your brain hasn't been there before you get there, it's going to be harder. I mean, I'm a pilot, so the rule is never let your aircraft arrive somewhere your brain hasn't been before. It's the same thing. And what happens is people get embroiled in tasks, in ticking things, in meetings, and so their brain hasn't got to the points where they've realized what they have to do with their people or their stakeholders or the way they need to chunk things up, and so they sort of rush into it. And the more we can think ahead of what we're doing, pre-elimination, etc., the easier it gets and the better it's likely that, the more it's likely that you're going to be able to deliver successfuli.
Yeah, fantastic. So in your view, in terms of looking to the future, what do you think are going to be, if there were, I'm going to ask you for words of wisdom in a moment, but in terms of trends for change management, if there are a few things that you think people should be looking for, maybe they're hearing all this, they're energized by the subject, and there's so many fascinating what are some of the key trends that you're seeing that you'd really encourage people to start exploring now if they're involved in
change?
change?
I'm glad that the project management community is talking more about human beings. It's much more conversation about human beings, soft skills and so on. That's fantastic. I mean, in my own world, I basically built Cube to support me. So it's a culture where you get on with the work. And one of the things I've done, for example, is on the book, I've actually created a specialist cubicle to match the book, where you can basically sign up for 12 weeks and you have a facilitator, obviously, because it's human, and they will hold your hand, hold your team members' hands, make sure that you do the drum beats and stuff and learn the tools and apply them in real life. And I think that whole idea of not learning for its own sake, but learning to apply is another thing which is, I think, is a really important trend, because I see people saying, we've got lots of qualifications, but have we got the capability? And this ability to apply is really quite central to the whole process. And that's the way I've approached it, because, of course, as you know, once it's digital, you can be there every day and so on and so forth.
Can you just explain, because for some listeners, they may not be familiar with Cube.
How can they not be familiar?
I'm sorry, Eddie.
Just
But
unbelievable.
It's such a powerful tool, this idea of having a virtual learning platform that's there anytime, any day, and that can access. Can you just tell people in a nutshell what it's about?
The best way to think about it is if you've ever played something like Minecraft or something like that, that's a game. So you go in there to play a game, okay? But imagine Minecraft was a place, your office, and you could meet everyone there and you could do normal real stuff like talking and looking at diagrams and planning and drawing things together in spreadsheets. That's what Cube is designed to do, but it's got all my tools baked into it. So when you start the meeting, it starts you off with hopes and fears. Yeah. So you have to do hopes and fears, and then no one's going to be left out. When you finish the meeting, you finish with rapid, responsible, accountable, provides input, decision maker. So that you know exactly who's doing what, and so on and so forth. So we build that in, and there are lots and lots of different rooms and places for people to meet. So it's a way of bringing everyone together, however dispersed they are, in 2 clicks in 8 seconds.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I'd really, again, encourage people. You've said they can get the free trial and the facilitation.
Yeah. So it's there's a link. It's QUBE, not CUB, QUB.cc/my all change cubicle.
Brilliant. And we can always put that in the follow-up for people, because I think it's a great alternative learning environment. If people are thinking, well, how do I make myself a learning organisation? It's a great tool they can go to and have access to all the tools and more that we've talked about today. I'm very conscious, believe it or not, we're 5 minutes from the end. So there are a couple of things in terms of your final words and thoughts. Obviously, notwithstanding Cube that we've mentioned, what would be your final words of wisdom to someone, or hints and tips, or things to go based on your many experiences that you'd like to leave people with today? Yeah, I mean,
okay, so I've been looking at change in projects for a long time, and when I started, people said about 60%, 70% of the time they were disappointed in what the outcome was. And here I am, like 4 decades later, and they're still disappointed, partly because the world got more complex. So it's not that we haven't got better, the world got more challenging. But it's still not a good number. And I think it's mostly because, as I was saying, people aren't changing and adapting and using what they have. They're still in the old world mindset of, I've signed it off with the stakeholder, with the client, therefore it's okay. They're still in the old world mindset, which says, I know where everyone knows what we're up to, so the team don't need to be told anything or grown. They don't need to innovate. So I think once you understand that this world is a fast-changing, complex world, it's about human beings, start with that. Start with serving each other, providing the best into your stakeholders. I think if you do that and you're practical in your projects, you'll have a wonderful life. I think if you imagine that you can do it academically, or you'll just go from one disaster to another, having to cover your trail, rewriting your LinkedIn bio over and over.
I mean, they're great words, and in fact, to coin a phrase that I learnt from you, I mean, you said we as PMs, so as project managers, and indeed inherently in that change managers, we own the future.
Yes.
So actually we've got to start making some of those changes and actually leading in that way. So I think that's both a challenge and an opportunity, as I would see it. Obviously, Eddie, so many things we could have talked about today. What I hope we've really engaged everyone with is that within the book there is so much that people can not only learn about, but to me the essence is you can apply it. You can look up a problem you're facing now. You can start doing it now, which is really important. So thank you, obviously, for your time today. I'd also like to let all our listeners know, if you've been engaged with this subject, if you're thinking you want to know more as well, we Provek are also launching our own APMG certified change management course, both foundation and practitioner. There's huge demand in this area, and we'll happily send the link out to everyone who's listened today and who may be interested in picking up on these topics and learning more insights as well from Eddie and others on how you can really be a successful change manager. But I think for today, I just want to say thank you to our listeners.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eddie, for coming along. Thanks. And I do hope we get to chat more going forward.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with your course.
Thank you very much.